Panel today includes Mary Ellen Charnley, Vice President, America's Presales COE, Siemens PLM Software. Thank you. See who's next. Barry Johnson, Dr. Barry Johnson, Senior Associate Dean of School of Engineering and Applied Sciences at University of Virginia and a board member of the Commonwealth Center for Advanced Manufacturing, or CCAM, as some people have come to call it. Brett Vassey, President and CEO of Virginia Manufacturers Association. And William Bill Donohue, Vice President and COO, GENEDGE Alliance. Our facilitator for today's panel discussion is Catherine Stevens, Institutional Effectiveness Specialist for the Southern Virginia Higher Education Center. Please be seated.
The number of U.S. manufacturing jobs has declined from nearly 20 million in 1979 to about 12 million today. Many economists have written the sector off as a sunset industry, while others see it as a growth sector. In your opinion, is there a real renaissance presently occurring in manufacturing?
I definitely believe that there's a renaissance, and I like to think of advanced manufacturing as the integration of technology, people, processes, and policies. And I think that technology is really important. Automation is a big part of that, and I think automation is a big reason that we have hope for the renaissance to really happen, because it enables companies to put manufacturing capabilities anywhere in the world, independent of labor cost, and the automation provides that capability.
We certainly have a public dialogue about the renaissance. Whether or not it's occurring, it just depends on how you measure it, quite frankly. Will we be back to our highest level of employment, highest number of factories anytime soon, meaning within the next 5 to 10 years, which is what we'd all like to hope? Unlikely. To give you an idea, we have 43% fewer workers today than we did 20 years ago. We only make slightly less gross state product, about $4 billion. We were at 38, we're about 34. So will we make up the ground of 200,000 workers in 5 years? No, that's just not realistic, and I think that the public dialogue makes a lot of promises for that. That's just not realistic. The real renaissance, in our observation, is we're looking at about a quarter, 24%, of our workers that can start retiring this year. So when they can, when the economy allows for it, they're retirement qualified. So for the first time in 20 years, we will have a large exodus of employees due to attrition. And the question is, what do we do as a country while we're also having this transition? And I'm sure we'll talk about this, what is advanced manufacturing? So you have these two things going on at the same time. So from my point of view, the more complex answer is, with technology, yes, there's a renaissance. With retirement, yes, there's a new opportunity. And with markets returning, there may be an opportunity there.
And over, I would say, the last 20 to 25 years, there have been a lot of businesses that have taken advantage of tremendous improvements in transportation and distribution systems to move production to low-wage cost economies. My great-grandmother was a shirt maker. She happened to live in upstate New York. And for those of you who probably don't know, that upstate New York used to be where the apparel business was. And it moved down here because of low-cost labor, as it had moved for the last 300 years. Well, we're to the point where we can't really find low-cost labor anymore. Today, a manufacturer who is producing a complex, technologically advanced product can compete here just as well as they can compete with a company in China or Vietnam or India. So I believe there's every opportunity today for that type of renaissance. But that requires individuals, entrepreneurs, and innovators to identify those markets, identify where those gaps are, trust in the ability to build it here, and take those first steps. The opportunities are there. The question is, are there folks in the audience, perhaps, or out of here who are willing to take those risks?
How does advanced manufacturing differ from traditional manufacturing?
It goes to a lot of the things that you had heard already about companies need to be innovative and flexible, right, in order to be competitive. Competitive price-wise, competitive quality-wise. That's what I talk about advanced manufacturing is, like you had said, the technology, the process, and then the workers or the tools that go along with building those complex parts.
Okay, so it's a complex model that requires all of those parts, and that differs from traditional manufacturing largely because of the technology?
In the process also.
Okay.
This question I get asked out of 365 days in a year, 300, probably. What is advanced manufacturing? Probably the best resource if anybody is policy wonkish and you want something. In April of 2010, the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology produced a report called The Study on Creating New Industries Through Science, Technology, and Innovation. And they went through the process nationally of trying to identify advanced manufacturing. And I want to give you 4 definitions, and I want to give you what industry would actually say. The first is from the Department of Labor, the Employment Training Administration. They define advanced manufacturing as implementing process improvements, increasing quality controls, and installing advanced robotics and other intelligent product systems. Okay, that sounds pretty good. Second definition that was used, the Council on Competitiveness. And they just emphasized in an article that they had written that advanced manufacturing must entail high-performance computing for modeling, simulation, and analysis. Okay, they've added ModSim to this. So that's a second. Third, New England Council and Deloitte Consulting. Many of you have used Deloitte's materials, very well respected. They distinguish between those sectors that are seen as, quote, traditional manufacturing and advanced manufacturing as this, in 3 ways. They differ in volume and scale, labor and skill, and the depth and diversity of the network surrounding the industry. So the ideas of clustering. And then the fourth is from the National Defense University, and they published this in 2002, and many of us have used this, that advanced manufacturing is just the insertion of new technology, improved processes, and management methods to improve the manufacturing of products. That's probably a very basic one. Now, after I've given you those 4 with this great think tank with the President's Council, do you know more than you started? Probably not. So here's really where I drill down on this, and I'm trying to make it real simple. Manufacturers don't sit in a room and say, am I an advanced manufacturer? Right. Only government does this. And government does it for one reason, to decide who you have resources available for. That's all it benefits. Are we going to have a program and spend money on this training, a program and money to spend on that R&D? Are we going to build a building for you, or are we not going to give an incentive to you? That's the purpose, in my humble opinion. But if you want to know ultimately how to think about manufacturing today, the easiest explanation I have is it's a continuum. Manufacturing is a continuum from labor-intensive to technology-intensive. And when you think of every manufacturer as an advanced manufacturer, they just fall at a different point in that continuum from labor-intensive to technology-intensive. And in particular, when you look at that, it falls into the areas of technology-intensive practices, processes, products, and people. And if you think of that continuum and you think of those 4 metrics, you will identify where that individual company falls in the need of resources. Some are more, some are less. But I will tell you that to kind of round this out, the future of our industry in a labor-intensive model is probably non-existent. It is always going to be moving in that continuum to the right, to the technology-intensive.
My organization is affiliated with the National Institute of Standards and Technology and the Department of Commerce. And they've grappled with that because they're a government entity, right? But they never came up with what's a definition for advanced manufacturing. But what they did do was they came up with a group of 5 things that advanced manufacturing needs to thrive. And the first is they have to, as Brett pointed out, they have to have a foundation in process improvement. Otherwise, you will go out of business. The second thing is increasingly you have to think sustainably. You have to think about the entire cycle, whether it's your carbon footprint, whether it's the sustainability of the materials that you use in your products. You have to think sustainably. The third is you have to think globally about your supply chains. Because increasingly, as you grow in scale, you win or lose based upon the value that's created through your supply chains. The fourth is increasingly you will see the acceleration of technology in your business. You may start very manual in your business as that business starts up, but you may have to automate, or you may have to go from a diverse business base to a clustered business base. But you have to be ready and willing to allow for the acceleration of technology in your business. And the fifth thing, and the most important thing, is you have to develop your workforce. Your workforce has to grow with you, and if your workforce grows with you, then you have the ability to meet the challenges that are ahead of you.
You all agree that there is indeed a resurgence, a renaissance. What do you see as the major driving forces behind this? And we've all read about the Chinese economy changing to a consumer economy, but what are the other factors that are pressuring this?
I'll take a stab at that.
Okay.
I think what always drives manufacturers, cost and competition. They get up every day worrying about how to drive cost out. They do that through innovation. They do that through a number of ways, but they're always thinking about their competition. If you think about the 1980s, who was going to control the world? It wasn't the Chinese. Chinese weren't even thought of. It was the Japanese in the auto industry. Everything we did was focused on the fact that the Japanese and their business model was going to supersede American industry. And that's not exactly the way it turned out. We learned, we adapted, we overcame. This is just another opportunity. But when I talk to executives every day, they are highly competitive people. That is really what motivates them. I call it running scared, but that really is what it is.
You know, I'd like to read something that this is actually taken from Canon's annual report. It's a public document. They're a publicly traded company, so you can get this on the web. But there's a statement in this report that says, continuing to pursue, in fact, Canon states that their strategy is continuing to pursue the strategies we have implemented to date, such as automated production and in-house production, and exploring cost reduction methods based on new ideas and innovative technologies. In addition, Canon will work to minimize transportation cost while at the same time strive to position manufacturing bases and allocate production in ways that minimize cost and risk from a comprehensive perspective, taking into account all possible factors such as exchange rates, tax policies, labor cost, procurement, and logistics. And I think you see in that the features, the only thing they didn't mention explicitly is workforce, but if you look at other parts of their annual report, they're talking about challenges in getting qualified workers and skilled workers. The other comment, and you know, I had given my definition of advanced manufacturing in my first comments, but I think the other way to think about it, I grew up in a small town called Gretna, Virginia, which is about 30 miles from Danville. When I was growing up, Danville had 39,000 people living in that community. 14,000 people were employed at Dan River Mills. When I was in my high school, I could walk out of that high school in the summer, and independent of my skill set, if I had a good back, I could get a job for the summer. I could get a part-time job working second or third shift if I wanted to after school. When I graduated, no questions asked. I could go to work for Dan River Mills, Klopman. That's changed, and I think to me that is fundamentally the difference between manufacturing and advanced manufacturing, is that in order to get a job in an advanced manufacturing environment, a strong back's not enough. It requires a skill set that is significantly greater than that. And I think, as pointed out, that is our real challenge, is providing those workers that can go into the advanced manufacturing environment and get those jobs and contribute to that type of economy.
Okay, one thing that I don't think any of you have mentioned, you mentioned a lot of things that I had, but one of them is the reshoring. You know, you talked about the cost. Well, the cost of transporting finished goods and then the quality of those goods when they get back have become an issue. So it's easier to, I mean, a lot of manufacturers have come to reshoring some of that work back. Another reason is if you're going to invest in an infrastructure as a company, you're going to invest in an infrastructure, they're leaning more towards investing in infrastructure at home, not necessarily overseas. So that is also aiding to help our renaissance of manufacturing in the country.
If you think about if you're going to be here all week, I think Harry Mosier's going to be here, where Harry's done a really good job on focusing on the total cost of ownership. And it's amazing to me, though, in the companies that we work with throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia, that, believe it or not, in many cases they really don't know what the cost base is of that competitor offshore that they're competing with. How can you compete when you don't know how you stack up? And really, to me, the whole trigger of this was Fukushima in Japan. Fukushima made large companies think a second or a third or a fourth time about the length of their supply chains, about the risks that are associated with sourcing materials from offshore. And once one begins to factor in that risk, well, geez, maybe I can nearshore, maybe I can onshore. Oh my goodness, maybe I could make it myself. A different dynamic. The other thing, though, you all need to understand is, who's been through business school lately?
Not lately.
Got a couple folks. When you went to business school, what did they teach you about capital? What did they teach you about risk? Didn't they teach you to avoid it? They did, didn't they? Now we're talking about manufacturing, which is a capital-based business. And you're telling me the business school tells you to avoid that? Well, I'm telling you that's heresy. But that's been going on for over 20 years. And it's wrong. I got news for you. There may be a banker or two in here, but what makes wealth, folks? You got to make it, you mine it, you grow it, or maybe you move it. I don't think I said anything about financial derivatives, did I? Thanks for speaking up. Didn't mean to pick on you. It's okay.
This is an excellent segue into my next question, which is the U.S. ready for the resurgence, and where are we in terms of global competitiveness?
I think we're hungry, but I don't think we're ready.
Infrastructure-wise?
We'll give you an example. Globally, we have a 20% price differential off the top against any competition. And that's everything from our tax code to our environmental regulations. Some of those can be overcome, but when you have the highest tax rate in the developed world, our 9 top trading partners lower than us, even Japan just lowered their corporate tax rate, we can't even balance our budget in this country at this point. we're prepared to walk off the fiscal cliff in January. The country's not quite ready, but it could be in short order, because these companies, Bill mentioned something very important. These companies, whether they're at their infancy in using resources like CCAM at the development side, the research side, or whether they're in full-scale production, they are heavily capitally intensive. And they cannot invest that level of risk long-term if they don't know what their long-term return is. So we have to be able to provide a regulatory environment nationally and at the states, a tax environment at the national level and at the states that's cooperative and is predictable, because that's where risk management comes in. And then you have energy issues and a variety of others. It's very complicated. But we do have a tremendous amount of work to do. Virginia's lucky in that we are rated #1 for business for many reasons, but in manufacturing, we're still a third smaller than North Carolina. We're almost a half smaller than Pennsylvania. We're 650% smaller than California. Those are all three places that have business environments that are, in our opinion, not as conducive as the Commonwealth. So even we have work to do if we're going to see that resource, that renaissance. So we have great opportunity, but we've got some immediate things to pay attention to, workforce being the final and biggest one.
What are the things that need to happen or need to be in place?
There's we've talked about it since I've been here, about the skilled labor. You know, since advanced manufacturing and complex parts, the labor is a big issue. The other thing that I'm pulling out of the air is some of the, like our energy efficiency. I don't know if you experience this in Virginia, but in certain times of the month we have brownouts. You know, you can't run your air conditioner, or you can't run your heating based on where you're at because of the energy problems. So if we go to an advanced manufacturing and we skill all our laborers, we do have to worry about our energy infrastructure in some places, because, you know, with automation comes more power, comes more cost, and so you need to be able to create that energy efficiently to manufacturers that are interested. So I know that's a far stretch from what we've been talking about, but it's just something different than I think what we've had mentioned.
So that's
Everything
really
else has been
an
mentioned.
infrastructure issue.
Right.
I do think, I mean, we've mentioned workforce quite a bit, and I do think that is the largest, certainly one of the largest, if not the largest issue. You know, one of the partners in CCAM is Rolls-Royce, and when Rolls-Royce was evaluating whether to build a factory in Virginia, they hired an outside consultant to do an assessment of the workforce, and what they concluded, and they would tell you this, it's nothing secret about it, what they concluded is that if they were going to build a facility that required 500 workers, they could do it with the pipeline of workers that were coming through the system. If they wanted to build a facility that required 2,500 workers, they could not do that because the pipeline was not sufficient to allow that to happen without wage inflation and competing with their neighbors effectively beyond what would be reasonable. And so I think, you know, figuring out a way to build that pipeline, and I come from a university, and it's not, the pipeline problem is not engineers, although that is a problem, but the problem in the manufacturing world is you know, welders, for example, manufacturing technicians, which is a category that VMA has promoted and been pushing that we need more of. And it's maintenance personnel. It's people that have the skill set to be able to go in and repair this complicated equipment when it fails. And so I think the biggest challenge we have, in my opinion, is building the pipeline of those skilled workers from you know, high schools, community colleges, and training centers throughout the state so that we can supply industry with the workers that they need.
So we've got the energy infrastructure, the workforce.
I'm going to take a little different tack. I think one of the things that manufacturing really lacks is a good brand. I think that if you think, I got some folks shaking their heads. You know, unfortunately, like it or not, manufacturing is still tied to the old view, which is based upon commodity manufacturing in terms of textiles, perhaps some of the old furniture factories that we had in this area. And so as a result, you know, the brand, that's an issue. And oh, by the way, layoffs. How stable is my job going to be? And with advanced manufacturing, businesses that are globally competitive, that have good balance sheets, that have good income statements, manufacturers are great places to work. But unfortunately, it has a very, very negative brand. You know, the person who was running the loom mill at Dan River Mills did not tell their child, I want you to work and do what I was doing. They may have pushed them to become an engineer. Okay? Well, where are people telling their children to do with their life in the future? Okay? So I think the brand is a big issue, and that's really fundamentally what I believe is the biggest single barrier that we have. You improve the brand, you'll improve the pipeline of people, you'll improve the quality of the worker.
Brett, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I would emphasize that. I think that I have always said that the best gift needs a bow. So we can build the best training programs, we can have the best tax laws, we can have reasonable regulation. At the end of the day, our data still shows that young people in particular, the 18 to 35, we're the very last industry they would choose to pursue for employment. And I don't say that pejoratively, that's actually a Deloitte statistic. So part of it is, and I said this in Inside Business, and they quoted me, unfortunately, so to no one, if you're a reporter, don't quote this one, but you know, we've got to bring sexy back. It's got to be attractive to work in the industry. You've got to feel good about what you're doing, and manufacturers, unfortunately, I'll tell a story about our own industry, we're still oftentimes recruiting and promoting position 2, shift 3, plant 4, and we make it so attractive. I mean, we really make those jobs look awesome in the newspaper. I mean, everybody wants to come and work there. No, I'm just being joking. But we have to be able to tell the story about what it's really like. And we started a few years ago a program called Dream It, Do It Virginia. It's in partnership with our national organization. It's in about 17 states. We now, by the end of this year, will have 10 regions. And it's all about telling the story differently. And I think Catherine DeRozier's here, our Director of Workforce, and they're doing a workshop tomorrow, but I'm not going to steal her thunder. But it's all about changing the way you think about the industry. And we found that when we did 2 years of research on this, and whether you were a transitioning military family, whether you were an 18 to 35-year-old who may just not have made the right choice and you don't like the career path you're in, or whether you just lost your job and you're looking for a new occupation, every one of those groups all said that they wanted something that made them feel good about what they were doing. What do I do? What am I contributing? And we came up with a campaign called So What Do You Do? And it's I make. I make this, I make that. But it's not I make a box. I make something that it contributes to life. And it really changes perceptions. And you have to see that laboratory. A modern manufacturer looks like a laboratory, not what my father worked in.
Right.
Super. Just out of curiosity, what are your metrics for measuring the effectiveness of your campaign?
Oh, marketing is very difficult to measure. We do a number of things. We do summer camps as part of it, so we measure how many kids get into that. We do web hits, the traditional Google Analytics, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's just how many more people are in that pipeline pursuing credentials. And that's the next generation for us. How many people are pursuing credentials that lead to employment?
And those include industry-driven credentials or industry-conferred?
Certifications are the big future for this industry.
Super. I want to focus now on the technology. We've talked about some of the environmental parts of the emerging renaissance, manufacturing renaissance, but in particular, what technologies, including software and hardware machinery, do our U.S. manufacturers need to be adopting now to be competitive? Clearly, they need Siemens PLM. So.
Clearly. Thank you for bringing that up.
In general, what do they need to be focusing on?
highly automated machine tools, right? To help with the quality, help with the mass production, and then of course the software to drive those machine tools. But I think that's a key point is complex products, like I've mentioned before, and the automation and we talked about being a manufacturer. If you call them manufacturer engineers, it's a little bit more acceptable. And so that's what you would do. You would put manufacturing and engineers that need to be both an IT person and a manufacturing person so that they can program the technology, drive the technology to deliver the machine tools and the finished goods.
Yeah, I think I think information technology is a broad banner under which a lot of it resides. I think I would include, though, more specifics as sensing, for example. I think sensing technology is phenomenal. We have the ability to measure lots of things that previously we couldn't measure. The challenge is integrating that into a process where that information is valuable and can be used to improve the manufacturing process. So I think it's the sensing, I think it's the networking that gets you that information. I think also there's an overused term called big data nowadays, but that is a big issue because if you can measure all sorts of data, the challenge is how do I make sense out of it? How do I extract information from the data so that I can use that information in a reliable way to improve my manufacturing process? So I think a lot of it is IT-based. A lot of it is control system-based. I think being able to do adaptive control technology while a process is running is an important element of it.
What's an example of an adaptive control technology?
Well, an adaptive control process might be, for example, one that could automatically modify its parameters in response to information that it's gathering about the product that it's producing. That could be changes in temperature, it could be changes in surface conditioning, it could be any of a number of things, but having the ability in real time to modify that process so that I can make changes to that product that's being made right now. And so it's really making changes while you're producing a product instead of having to wait until you're finished and then go back and do that for future products that are coming out of your line.
I would think we've got two things. The first is, if you're really going to grow, you got to think international. You got to think where the consumers of tomorrow are going to be. They're not here. I mean, we're going to move along with hopefully a decent GDP. At least that's what our government's hoping, so we can figure out how to pay off our debt. But the world, the opportunities are offshore. So I think we have to be in a position where we're thinking differently about our markets, even when we're a 5 or a 10 or even a $20 million business. We have to think different. And then I think the other thing that we have to do is we have to be able to innovate better than anybody else. We have to take the intellectual capability and capacity of everyone who's in our business, who's in our supply chains, who's in our customers, and we have to figure out where that next opportunity is. And if we can figure that out and start down the product development path, and oh, by the way, if what we're starting doesn't make sense, we can drop it, or what we call it, fail fast, fail cheap, and move on to the next thing. Well, you know what? We'll win more times than not. So, two things. Think international, and think how to make innovation part of every day.
When you say think international, you're talking in terms of becoming a net exporter?
Absolutely. You have to go where the market is, okay? And whether you're going direct to the market, through Amazon or Alibaba, or whether you're actually doing it through an import-export relationship. You've got great resources in Virginia through people like Virginia Economic Development Partnership to help you do that. Think differently. Think big.
Brett, what are the technology pieces that you see U.S. companies need to adopt?
Well, I think what you see is, you know, in our industry, there's a food chain. There's the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 type manufacturers. And what has happened with the speed and the transition of technology, everybody who's studied Moore's law knows that that transitions into not only the IT and computing world, but that shows up in everything in our world very quickly. So the idea of buying a piece of equipment that lasts 20 or 50 years, that's not really where we're at anymore. We're looking at the rapid transition in and out of technology, which poses challenges for training, by the way, because we like to build big centers, and that's very difficult, and it's very expensive because they're doorstops in 8 years. You've got to be able to keep it up, sustainability. But what the beauty of that, though, is the speed of transition has enabled the smaller manufacturers to have access, because of price, to technology they didn't have access 20 years ago. So we literally have companies that have 25 employees that are looking at automated equipment that they may not have had access to before. We have companies that have 100 employees that actually can find a way to do the cost benefit to even some sense of automation, even if just automatic palleting. We have companies in the 200 to 300 employee range that can think about robotics. Those used to only be the purview of big automotive companies, for instance. So we see that transition of technology to the smaller sized companies happening faster, and helping them to understand, to know what you don't know is a big challenge, because they're worried about payroll and production like everybody else, but their challenges oftentimes are bigger. But the opportunities are there. So the IT world and the hard technology world integrated, that is a next generation for our small and mediums, no question.
So is that a barrier, do you think, for especially for Virginia manufacturers, not knowing the scalability of capital investment or the possible scalability?
Well, I think that they know it, they're learning it. The challenge is affording it and being able to adapt. And that's always going to be a challenge, but that's why good companies do what they do. They adapt.
Mm-hmm. And I believe that we're going to stay on our original time schedule. So we're right at 3 p.m. I want to close with one more question, and that is, I'd like for each of you to comment on what you think the opportunities are for Virginia, and in particular for Southern Virginia, in terms of advanced manufacturing. That's a little bit of a wide open question.
Okay, I'll start again. Basically, there's two future opportunities that I see, and I'll be really brief. One of them is advanced materials, right? We talk about composites, and we look at what airplanes are made out of now, and, you know, carbon-based composites, you used to put them on top of each other and then meld them together. Now, we may have to automate that process, and they've learned to improve that process so that it's not just in a prototype stage anymore, it's also can do finished products, but we just need to be able to do that quicker in a more mass produce, that type. And the other one is additive machinery, which goes along with what I was saying before, as opposed to the old way, you take a hunk of steel and you carve it out. This is adding materials, using 3D models to add materials as you need or as designed. I don't know how it impacts Southern Virginia, but I'm sure it's pretty much global, so it'll help.
Sounds really good to us.
Well, I'm gonna look at it from a little bit of a different angle, but I think in terms of opportunities for Southern Virginia, you know, that we're seeing it at this symposium to some extent. I think the GENEDGE, the center that has been created, and the investments that have been made in that center. I think CCAM, which is not too far away, the Commonwealth Center for Advanced Manufacturing. I think those types of activities are going to be attractive to companies that are thinking about building facilities in a region. I think there are going to be opportunities to produce workers with the skills that those companies need. We talked about the access to technology, and I really believe that it's critical that, you know, we build a pipeline of new technologies that can flow from fundamental idea to commercialization as quickly as we can possibly get them there. And I think that CAME and CCAM and the initiatives that we're creating within Southern Virginia provide that. And so I see that as an opportunity for us to build upon, to create what I would hope would be a top 10 manufacturing cluster here centered in Southern Virginia that would develop over the next 10 to 15 years.
Excellent. Brett?
I think that when I look at this region, I look at Southern Virginia really from Emporia to Danville. It's a big region. It's an issue of critical mass. Where you locate and where the resources are, that's a big geographic region. I take a little different tack because regardless of what government resources we put in place, the business economics don't change. You've got to have a market for your product. It has to be sustainable and competitive. You've got to have the business environment that allows you to be competitive. And I think the region has the ability to basically attract any industry sector it wants as long as it's willing to address all of the above. One center is a start. 2 centers is a foot ahead. All of the things we've talked about, from workforce to tax reform to environmental to our federal friends helping us, all of that together could help the region do just about anything it would like to do. But you can't have one without the other. Build it and they'll come rarely works. You've got to have this comprehensive strategy where you're looking very well at all of it. And it's very complicated. This is not an easy industry to serve. But they've done an excellent job of setting a good foundation for the next step.
Bill, what do you see?
Well, you know, I live here, so that's an interesting question. I think, first off, I think we've got to look at our heritage a little bit. And our heritage is, and by the way, I'm a transplant, so I didn't grow up here. But the heritage is, first, we have predominantly an agricultural economy, which means people who are self-reliant, relatively strong-willed, understand what it means to be in business, are good mechanically, electrically, have a good aptitude. Those are all assets that make for a great supply chain for manufacturing, advanced manufacturing workers. So I think that there are tremendous opportunities here, and I think there are a lot of things that have started well, but I do believe that there is a need, as Brett pointed out, it's a big region. The region really needs to think more like a region, more like what happened in Greenville-Spartanburg 20 years ago, when that area became very attractive to high technology industries. They put a strategy together, and it worked. I think the region is close, but it's not quite there. I wish I could give you the rosy picture, but we still have a ways to go. Okay?
Thank you. I'm going to close. Unless we have any burning questions from the audience, I'm going to try to keep on the time schedule. And the next step is the tours at r&dcamee and at Riverstone. Sure. But I want to thank you all so much for sharing your time and your expertise. And I think the takeaway message is that, yes, this is real. It is happening. It's the product of people who are hard workers and innovative thinkers and who are awestruck. But it's also that we have some work to do, and particularly in our region. But I thank you very much for coming. And thank you all.